Hello students, welcome to the third session for 10th standard science. Well, in the last class we have discussed very well about the nutrition in amoeba and in much detail about the human digestive system. Well, today we shall focus on one of the most important processes which is taking place in human beings as well as in case of other living organisms is respiration. Now you might be thinking that respiration is equal to breathing, but no, there is a large difference between the respiration and breathing. So what is the answer? Well, breathing is just the intake of oxygen and giving out of the carbon dioxide. But respiration is after the intake of the oxygen, that oxygen is used for the purpose of breakdown of the food and to get energy, and that is said to be respiration. So basically, respiration is nothing but the oxidation of food in order to get maximum amount of energy, that is said to be the respiration. Now, on the basis of the use of oxygen, there are two basic types of the respiration. They are the aerobic respiration and the anaerobic respiration. Now, the aerobic respiration. Now, aerobic respiration is the type of respiration in which the oxygen is basically used. And at the end of this aerobic respiration, large amount of energy is basically produced. So where does this aerobic respiration mainly takes place? It mainly takes place inside the cytoplasm and the mitochondria of the typical cells. And mainly the examples are various numerous plants and the animals. Furthermore, the end products of this aerobic respiration is the carbon dioxide and water with the release of large amount of the energy. The second part, that is the anaerobic respiration. Now here the oxygen is not used. So the organisms who are doing this respiration, they are not using any sort of oxygen for the purpose of respiration. Furthermore, the end products of this kind of respiration is either ethanol or the lactic acid with the release of the carbon dioxide content. Here, very less amount of energy is being generated, and this kind of respiration takes place only in certain specific regions of the cell, not in all the regions. While here we can see a typical chart showing the representation of where the aerobic and the anaerobic respiration mainly takes place. In case of the aerobic respiration, we can see very well that large amount of energy is released, and in case of the anaerobic respiration, that is in specific plants and during the specific time, in case of the animals, very less amount of energy is basically released. Now moving on to the respiration in plants. Well, there is a vast difference with which the respiration takes place in plants and in case of the animals. Well, talking about the plants, each and every organ of the plant, specifically the roots, stems and the leaves, they perform respiration independently. While in case of the humans, we have only the one organ, that is the lungs, for the purpose of respiration. The second point, the respiration is there at a much slower rate in case of the plants because they do not have to move from one place to the other. While in case of the animals, they do move from one place to the other and perform various metabolic activities. So the respiration is very much faster. Also, in case of the plants, the transport of the gases is not taking place, as each and every part is performing the respiration independently. While in case of the humans, the transport of the gases basically take place. So that is the basic differences between the respiration in plants and the animals. Now, if at all the respiration is taking place specifically in roots, stems and leaves, how it is taking place? Let us examine it one by one. The first one, respiration in case of the roots. Now, here in the diagram we can see very well that the roots which are beneath the soil, they have specific minute hair-like structures, and they are said to be the root hairs. So the soil particles are having a lot of spaces in between them. So these root hairs, they go in between them and they take up the oxygen content required by the plants. So that is the respiration in case of the roots. Moving on to the second one, that is the respiration in case of the stems. Now on the surface of the stems there are minute holes, minute pores, and these minute pores are known as the lenticels. And through these lenticels the atmospheric oxygen is taken inside. And the third, that is the respiration in case of the leaves. Well, on the surface of the leaves there are very large amount of minute pores, and these minute pores are known as the stomata. So through these stomata the atmospheric oxygen is taken inside the leaves and various metabolic activities are basically performed. Now let us go into the human respiratory system. Now whenever we talk about the human respiratory system, only nose comes into our mind. But it is not so. There are numerous organs which are participating in this entire process and for this entire system. Here is a pictorial representation of the entire respiratory system, and it mainly starts with the nose. Now let us observe the structure of a typical nose. It mainly consists of the external nostrils. So these openings are known as the external nostrils. It proceeds further into one chamber, and that chamber is known as the nasal chamber, which is proceeded further into the internal nostrils. Now focusing on the nasal chamber. Now nasal chamber basically possesses two major structures, minute hair and the mucus. Now what do? They basically trap the dust particles which are coming into the air, which is coming from the atmosphere into our lungs. And then these dust particles from our nose, it is removed by various means. Moving on further, this internal nostrils proceed further into the pharynx region. Near the pharynx, we humans have larynx, mainly considered as the voice box. Now this pharynx region further divides into two tubes. One of them is the windpipe and the other is the food pipe. Now this windpipe, now it is known as the trachea, and the food pipe we know very well, that is the esophagus. Now at the starting of the trachea there is one opening, and that opening is known as the glottis. This glottis is mainly covered by one flap, and that flap is known as the epiglottis. Now why it is present? Basically it so happens that sometimes at the time of eating food or drinking water we speak. So sometimes the food or water might enter into the respiratory tract by the opening of the flap, that is the esophagus. So we feel some sort of the coughing sensation. So it is advisable not to speak at the time of eating or drinking water. So that flap does not allow the food or water to enter into the trachea. Now that trachea is basically made up of C-shaped cartilaginous rings, and the opening of this C-shaped cartilaginous rings, it is not present towards the outer side, it is present towards the inner side. Further, why it is made up of the cartilage? So that even if the air is absent, the trachea maintains its proper shape and the texture. Furthermore, that trachea passes into the thoracic region, that is the chest region, and it divides into two bronchi, each of them entering into the lungs, and then they divide into a lot of smaller branches known as the bronchioles. These bronchioles, they end up into the grape-like structure known as the alveoli. Now the wall of the alveoli is basically thin in nature, and these alveoli are surrounded by the blood capillaries. Why is it so? So that the oxygen that is entering into our lungs and then going through the alveoli, it can easily pass through the thin wall of the alveoli into the bloodstream, and then it can reach to various regions of the body. Now moving on to the mechanism of respiration, how this respiration process basically takes place. Now between the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity, there is a muscular diaphragm. So this entire respiratory mechanism is basically categorized into two major steps: the inspiration and the expiration. So this muscular diaphragm plays a huge role in these processes. Now the first step, the inspiration. Now how the air enters our lungs. Now this muscular diaphragm, it basically goes in a downward manner, and as a result of which the lungs expand in nature. As a result of the expansion of the lungs, the air pressure inside the lungs decreases. Now inside pressure is less, the external atmospheric pressure is more, and air always moves from high pressure to low pressure. So the air from outside enters into our lungs, and the exchange of the gases basically takes place. That is the inspiration. Moving on to the expiration. In case of the expiration, the diaphragm comes back to its normal position, and the pressure is created in the lungs. So the air pressure inside the lungs increases. So inside air pressure is more, outside air pressure is less. So air from inside is expelled outside. So that is about the expiration. So that is the entire thing about the human respiratory system, right from the nose to the alveoli, and the exchange of gases taking place at the alveoli. Thank you very much. In the next session, we shall proceed in much detail about the other life processes.